everyone, and welcome to today's free public webinar with Certus and the OSHA Education Center. My name is Ryan Smith, and I am joined here by Andy Marks. I am the solutions engineer here at Certus and OSHA Education Center, and Andy is our product expert here at OSHA Education Center. We are here to talk to you today all about the training challenges for the construction industry, the specific things we're seeing in the construction environments, what folks are looking for in those environments in terms of priorities, and then some ideas and concepts around building training programs for folks in the construction industry. This session will be recorded today, so a couple little housekeeping items. This recording of this session will be made available to you all of you here who have registered and attended this session, about 24 hours after this session wraps up, so be on the lookout for that in your email. And also, we'll be sharing a construction industry report with you as well about some of the info you're seeing in this presentation today, so be on the lookout for that as well. Also, something to share with you all here, since today's session is live and in person, feel free to interact with us using what we call the questions feature. So you should see on your GoToWebinar sidebar there, you should see a questions tab. Feel free to type in your questions and we'll be able to do our Q&A session at the end of today's session. We'll be able to answer your questions. And one more thing before we kick it off, we have the ability to do just a little interaction now since our session is live today. We're going to ask you a couple questions, just some curiosities about who is here on the line, and get our gears turning a little bit about as we just talk about the construction industry and the construction role. So first and foremost, I'm going to present a poll to you all. So what you should see here popping up in front of this presentation right now is a question. And that question is, how would you best describe your job role? Would you say you are a safety manager, a supervisor or foreman? And I think supervisors also include engineers, right? Construction workers, technicians, or transportation and equipment operator. How would you best describe your role? If you don't see your role here listed, feel free to, you don't have to necessarily fill in the poll question, but we have a bunch of great responses coming in. And what's great about this is it's showing me what percentage of people have voted. So we have over half of you now who have voted. Excellent. I think we got a good quantity of answers from y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and close. And I'll share those results with you now. All right, so you should be seeing our poll results from today's session. 77% of you, so definitely the vast majority of you, are safety managers here on the line. So definitely in the right place. We're all talking about best practices for training and some of the unique challenges for offering training. So I think we're all in the right place here. The 20% of you, pretty much the remainder of you, are in the supervisor and foreman world. So you are supervising what's happening on the job site. You are the engineers who are responsible for, creating these safe work environments for your job site. So and taking on some of that liability, which we're going to be talking about here in a little bit as well. Thank you so much. I'm going to hide those, so you should see those disappearing from you. And we're going to ask one more quick question for you, and that is, how well do you feel your training program mitigates hazards? So I'm going to go ahead and launch this. How well do you feel your training program mitigates the full range of hazards on your site? This is just kind of a quick gut check on how you're feeling about your training presently. Are you feeling that it's really effective, very effective in mitigating hazards? Is your training proving to be moderately effective, only slightly effective, maybe not at all? Or maybe this question doesn't apply to you, NA, because, hey, we don't have a training program that I know of, so you can feel free to put that there as well. Got a good proportion of you. So I know that we go from different job sites to job sites, let's say, but just think about the one you're presently actively working on would be a good one to bring up to mind. All right, we got about 3/4 of you who have voted. That's good. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and share the results with you all. So definitely the majority of us, 54% of us, say moderately effective. So we have some room for improvement, right? We're noticing that there are some gaps and that we can cross to be very effective. So we're going to talk about maybe some of those things that can get us over the threshold of being excellent instead of just maybe, subpar, so to speak. 22% of you are saying, yes, we have a very effective program and you want to continue with those best practices. So we'll talk there. 7% of you, I think, notable, is to say, hey, we don't really have a training program that I know of. So this will be a good way for those of you here who don't have a training program to really get, some initial best practices. I'm going to go ahead and hide those results. And before we jump in, I know we got a couple questions before the session began about personal development hours and things like that. This is a free informational session, so we're not going to be offering any certificates or personal development hours for this session, but we hope you do get some great information out of this, and you can utilize our training moving forward after this session wraps, and we'll give you some input on how to do so to get some personal development hours and continuing education units. So without further ado, let's jump in. So our goal today is to talk about the specific challenges regarding training for folks in the construction world. And at its face, I mean, construction industry, I think we all know all too well, but let's break down some of the statistics here of what is being seen in the construction industry about the specific hazards in particular that are being reported to OSHA specific to the construction industry. I mean, at the end of the day, construction is a very transient type of environment where there's a lot of things changing and a lot of things in progress. And because of that, relative to, let's say, the general industry standards, where things are permanently installed, in place, kind of constant, in the construction world, things are a little bit more, just a little bit more morphing and changing. And because there's things constantly changing, notice that there are even more accidents that happen regarding those changes. So the number one category of things you see here that become violations and incidents for OSHA are, number one, are falls. So if we're on temporary structures like scaffolding and temporary structures where we're going up, let's say doing structural painting, which is also included in the construction standards for OSHA 1929, being struck by objects. So on these areas where there's things being built and things in progress, there's also heavy equipment, excavation equipment, backhoes and so on and so forth being operated. So being struck by these objects, not only by this heavy equipment, but we also see caught in between as well, different pieces of equipment. So if there's lots of lumber, there's lots of steel, there's lots of rebar, as you can see here in the picture. There's just a lot of equipment and things to be caught in between on the job sites. But not only that, as we see in item number 3 here, electrocutions. So electrical panels, electrical wire runs underground or above ground are being ran where there's actually live electrical equipment a little bit more readily kind of able to be exposed to on the construction site. So what we see on the 2022 results, that 1,034 construction workers lost their lives on the job in 2022. And that's really, if that doesn't, that is a lot of people, but if you do the statistics of percentage, that's 21% of all worker fatalities in the private sector were just from construction alone. And we all know that there's a wide variety of different jobs and industries out there in the private sector, but 1 out of every 5 of those came from construction. That's definitely a big piece in the reason why we need specific approaches specific to the construction industry. So that's kind of something we talk about in terms of tailoring training and for getting training that is applicable to these folks. So breaking it down a little bit more, kind of what some of these risks are that we're seeing in the environments, particularly falls, slips, and trips. So this kind of all comes back to, we see a couple of categories that relate to weather conditions, right? So if we're outdoors, if we're in either the extreme heat or the extreme cold, we can see a bunch of different things that can happen, particularly slippery surfaces with ice and or rain, where there's things that are wet, things that are slippery, and we see number one, first and foremost, 39.2% people are getting themselves hurt on the job site by slipping, tripping, and falling. So not only are these slippery conditions causing them, but more importantly, some of the temporary structures that we build where we have to get up high and do some construction work, whether it's building structures, or building any sort of thing in the construction site, we're seeing us having to get up high and thereby getting the risk of falls. So 39% of those fatalities, so those deadly falls above the 6 feet OSHA requirement, have caused those fatalities. Right behind that at 22% are the transportation related incidents. So there's a lot of equipment running around here on these job sites, like we talked about. So this also includes not just the, let's say, the excavation and building equipment, but also transportation of equipment to and from the job site. So if we're transporting the building materials and we're transporting things via truck from, let's say, job site to job site, that's where incidents can happen. I know we always say that vehicle accidents are one of the #1 killers of people in this country, and this kind of speaks to that, where if we're in the construction world and we're transporting things left and right, just automotive accidents of any kind are all encompassed into this, where we have to take that approach as construction folks, making sure that we're not only paying attention to the people who are on our site, but people who are transporting things to and from that site as well. Contact with objects and equipment. So this kind of all includes different things, electrical and I guess you could say mechanical contact with equipment. So we're getting caught between objects, struck by objects, and coming in direct contact to energized electrical equipment as well. That's that 21%. So really, between transportation and contact with direct objects and energized objects, that's about 50% of the pie right there. So we're really seeing some trends coming forth, that over 75% of everything in this pie has to do with just the mechanical nature of being out in the open. But then we even add to that the exposure to harmful substances in the environment. This is where the environment itself becomes the hazard. So not just slipping and falling, but the actual heat or the cold of that environment. So that hazard of just the environment itself. Extreme heat, what we know how in the construction world on how dangerous extreme heat conditions in the summer, let's say in Florida, versus extreme cold in the winter way up in Maine, let's say. There's just a lot of extra considerations for protection that need to be considered in these environments. Extra PPE, extra protection, extra rest that is needed between bouts of heavy work. And then finally, fires. So there are things that are exposed out there from with flame and fire. There's wood, there's flammable objects in the environment that can a lot more readily be caught afire. So that is 3.5% in those environments. So high risk environments, that's the first kind of requirement we're going to see for a training program, is how do we deal with the unique risks of our environment and how do we train to those risks, right? So we can't just do a standard, here's what safety means type of thing. It has to be really tailored to here's what safety means in our specific environment. And because of that, #2 here, in terms of requirement for what a training program needs to have, is speaking to dynamic workplaces. So not only are these things happening, right? There's slips and falls, there's trips, there's contact with equipment, but there is also just the fact that that might change tomorrow. So I know in the general industry world, we call managing change, right? Change management. That is happening daily on a construction site. So when things change, when there's different equipment being brought to the site and different things being built on a different day, all the requirements for what we need to be aware of change. So dealing with that dynamic workplace and making sure we're adapting to that dynamic workplace is important as we build a training program. So that might even mean, as things are shifting daily, requiring training approaches to shift and maybe serving something else differently from the collection of training that you have, depending on your environment. So having a flexibility, I guess, is the point I'm making with dynamic workplace, having the flexibility to change what you offer up in training and adjust how you offer training to people, depending on your environment. But also, so for those of us in the safety management, which a vast majority of us are, having making sure that the folks out there who are supervising and the folks out there who are even doing the work are understanding the regulatory requirements that they are working within. So OSHA 1926 is the overall OSHA Code of Federal Regulations that we're going to be chatting about today, that has specific requirements that are different and adjusted. We can't get into all the nitty gritty of that in today's session, but we will, briefly chat about some of the ins and outs of OSHA 1926 today. But at the end of the day, OSHA, as we see here, some of the stats. As of 2025, penalties for serious violations can reach 16,550 just for a single violation. But if there's willful or repeat violations found, they can cost up to 10 times that, 16,514 per violation. So $165,000. Imagine that just being lost from the organization or from the entity responsible for the construction at the job site. That can mean life or death in terms of the financial well-being of the company. So not only are people getting hurt and killed, but the actual well-being of the organization in the future is at stake with such penalties. So that's definitely something to be aware of. So where does the role of safety training come into play? If we're understanding some of these requirements, then what does the training program need to have, knowing that we have a dynamic workplace, we have very unique hazards in our workplace, and we have standards that we have to work within? Well, first and foremost, imagine training, right? So folks who are sitting down to do training, we know they have to be aware of, let's say, PPE. They have to be aware of their hazardous environment. They have to be aware of how to protect themselves from falls, for example. They need training that applies to them, right? It needs to be, we here as obviously a training provider here, we talk about the vast majority of our customers are asking for hands-on training, right? Applicable training, real world, they call it training. So that's the number one thing we look for. And so that's the number one thing that should be covered in a training program is real world, focusing on real world scenarios. So folks out there doing hands-on work, they don't want to sit and just be talked at, right? And maybe with just text or a PowerPoint, essentially. You want to be seeing how this actually applies to my work. So that's going to be pretty much number one on anyone's list, is make this apply to my work. Make me feel like I walked away with something useful at the end of this training. But for those of us in the safety world, we have to address the regulations at play, and we have to hit all those compliance items as well with training. So OSHA 1926, particularly just two parts that we're bringing into surface here. Subpart K, electrical, so really understanding the unique electrical hazards, and subpart M, the fall protection regulations as well, and making sure that we understand the unique fall protection requirements for our work sites. So that this is what we're talking about is, as we know, OSHA can show up at our door or at the entrance of our job site at any moment, at any time. So we want to make sure that we are maintaining that compliance in case those inspections do and often do happen. So just a quick kind of analysis of some of the comparison between what many of us know in the general industry is OSHA 1910, the Code of Federal Regulations, versus OSHA 1926, the Code of Federal Regulations, which is specific to construction. So the general industry standard 1910 really applies to pretty much most workplaces, anywhere that would be considered doing work in a building, manufacturing, commercial and industrial spaces around the country. But anytime you are doing any sort of building or adding or altering of a building, so construction of a new building, alteration, sometimes we forget that just constructing maybe a new room or a new wing of a building applies with this new standard, 1926, but also repair of a building. So if we're going up and fixing, let's say, a leaky roof, or if we're going up and dealing with a dented wall in our factory or something like that, that repair work is considered under the 1926 standard. And also painting. So painting usually isn't associated with building or construction work, but it really is. It applies all the same stuff. We're outdoors, we're building scaffolding, we're building temporary structures, we are up high, that kind of stuff. So that's also covered in 1926. Specifics covered in 1910, floor conditions, ladders, stairways, fall protection systems, just to name a few, everywhere kind of from those all the way over to fire protection and electrical safety, etc. Those same things are covered in 1926, but also with an increased emphasis on other things we see in the construction world, the cranes, suspended platforms, material hoists, and personnel hoists, for example. Things are moving back and forth. Heavy things are moving back and forth. So material handling and hoisting is more concerned. And also fall protection is just considered differently in 1926 with some different requirements around guardrails, scaffolding, and the 4 foot versus 6 foot requirement, for example, on minimum surface height. Additional topics covered, for example, also there's additional just areas of focus and coverage in 1910 around electrical safety, HazCom, hazardous waste, and global harmonization, for example, PPE requirements of like factories and inside areas like confined space and that kind of stuff. All those same things are covered again in OSHA 1926, but for the focus of these more dynamic outdoor environments and traffic control signs. So that this is something that is pretty unique to construction world, that we might be doing construction out on the roads, right? Where traffic control and how to properly and safely and adequately conduct traffic control with different signs and devices is covered. So just give a little idea of kind of the compare and contrast there. So we have to understand those regulations. We have to get kind of an appreciation for that when it comes to training. But kind of this comes to the softer side of training, right? We have to have it applicable. That's the hard stuff. But just for a moment, there has to be that softer side of training that we all know about, and that is creating a safety culture, right? Because people are looking out for themselves on these job sites. And so how can this training program be instituting and encouraging that culture of training or of safety through the training? So what we talk about here is, understanding our site-specific hazards, everyone kind of rallying around following the best practices. All right, before we all get on this scissor lift or all get on the scaffold, we're all going to be wearing our lanyards and our fall arrest systems and all that kind of stuff, and our harnesses. We're going to be doing this and holding ourselves accountable and calling ourselves out if we see someone not doing it the correct way. Just we're all responsible for each other, kind of keeping that safety culture. And hey, did you take your training yet? I know it's due, in a week. Did we all do that? We all just got to get it done, that type of stuff. So no training is really effective unless it's part of that safety culture, because yes, you can assign training, but caring about the training is another thing, and that's really where the safety culture comes in. Making sure it's part of that safety culture is important. But then getting back to the hard stuff at the end of the day, there needs to be some sort of quantifiable return on investment, or what we call a return on safety. Because at the end of the day, return on investment and return on safety is kind of interchangeable in a lot of ways. Safety costs us money at the end of the day. A lot of organizations, and this is kind of what we face as a training industry provider, is training is an expense, right? I'm spending money on training. So I've just spent money on this, and that's all it is. It's an expense. But looking past that expense to see how that expense has made us money back or saved us money in return is really an important thing to be considering as part of any long-term training initiative. First and foremost, what we always say in terms of how can I verify my investment in training? Well, fewer incidents, flat out, right? So fewer incidents mean less downtime on the site, and that's one thing. So we can talk about effectiveness of downtime, but we all know that there's just astronomical costs for workers' compensation and all of the doctor's visits and litigation behind the insurance costs and all that kind of stuff when someone gets hurt on the job site. So that is another thing considerable. So if any of you who are working as safety managers here have previous data on how much we spent on the job site for incidents, I think you can quickly see that even saving ourselves from one injury, one fatality, and one just incident or even violation from OSHA can save us huge money in terms of return on investment. In looking at the National Safety Council study that was done, companies save $4 for every $1 invested in safety program. Because you think about it, awareness of someone, let's say they took a training and they realized, oh yeah, this could happen. I didn't realize how serious this was, and they take that with them to the job site. There is it's kind of a butterfly effect that happens, because then that awareness spreads to others, that awareness spreads to everything they do and everyone they work with, particularly the supervisors who have that enhanced level of training, which Andy's going to talk about here shortly, about these enhanced levels of training and awareness that happen. That spreads to other people, and so that $4 for every $1 really does become a reality. And then that same study also found that implementing a tailored safety training program, so tailoring the training program to who is being the receiver of that training, experienced a 50% reduction in the regulatory violations. So OSHA would come on site and they'd say, hey, things are looking good, and there's actually no action items needed and no assessments levied upon those folks. So that's really the whole tailoring aspect. So to review here, what are some of our requirements for a training? It's all about focusing on real world scenarios, keeping up with the complex regulations of this dynamic environment, customization for our safety culture, so making sure it's part of any good safety culture, and ensuring that it has a return on our investment there. So our next really objective here is to talk about how can we build a training program with these wide-ranging requirements, and what are some best practices that we can share. So that's really where I'm going to hand it over to our resident expert on this topic, Andy Marks, who is the head of our product team. And I'm going to hand over this screen share to you right now, Andy. Make you a presenter. There we go. And yeah, Andy's going to tell us all about the ins and outs of training program development for the particular construction use case in our field. So thank you so much for being here, Andy. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and how'd I do on sharing my screen, Ryan?
Looks great.
Okay, excellent. And thanks for the lead in. Very, very exciting to get to talk to everybody here. As Ryan said, I'm the Vice President of Product, focused on EHS broadly, and also, hyper laser focused on OSHA as a, we are OSHA Education Center. So I think it would sort of be malpractice if we didn't start, even though this is a seminar about training, understood, but we got to take one just quick step back and make sure we start by asking, how do we really keep people safe? And we know that starts before training, and that we have a lot more that we can do. There's training's not our only line of defense, or even the first line of defense. A good example here from our hierarchy of controls. I saw we have a lot of safety managers, so I'm sure for most folks this is not a new concept. But if you think about someone working on a scaffold, for example, the first thing you want to do is just eliminate whatever hazards that they have, right? So can we keep the walkways up there clear? Can we substitute as a control, instead of using a scaffold, can we rely on an elevated work platform? Can we engineer some controls around guardrails or safety nets? Process controls could be just around daily inspections, or including, elements of this year toolbox talk around how to stay safe on a scaffold. But then there is fall protection training as a critical element, and then PPE. Obviously, we hope that we put on our PPE, our hard hat every day, and nothing ever hits us in the head, and we feel a little silly that we wore it. But the reality is everything above PPE should stop us from ever having to have the helmet on in the first place, and also always put on your helmet. So from there, we kind of want to say, all right, so the goal is to keep people safe. Rather than just focus on training, let's focus on the first step, which is going to be a job hazard analysis. I know the term is in and out of favor with different audiences, from JHA or task hazard analysis or task safety analysis. Right, but at its core, it's the same concept, which is we want to break down what people are really doing day to day into discrete tasks, the real individual steps through which they're working, and then review what are all the hazards or risks they face, and to not give up at one, but to really list out all the things that could go wrong in that situation. And then we refer back to that pyramid, to that hierarchy of controls, and ask what is it that we're doing or not doing to prevent something from going wrong. So again, that fall harness never has to do its job, but also wear your fall harness. This is one example from OSHA.gov. They've got 3 or 4 versions of a JHA. You can find other folks. The reason I picked this one is it's just very, very simple. It's what are you doing? What's the risk? And what are we doing to control it? I know depending on your level of maturity as an organization, you might be relying on one that kind of lists our existing controls and includes more jobs on a single form. But I do think this is an excellent starting place. And it also will get us beyond just our the whole range of controls into, well, what does our training program actually have to look like? Next slide. So I thought it might be worthwhile to walk through kind of some examples of what this might look like. So for example, and we won't touch every one of them because I've got 5 of these, so I don't think everybody wants me to walk through each individual step of all of them, but at least a couple we'll look at. So I've got at this top one, the construction laborer doing scaffolding work. And you can see the steps they're going through. First, they're going to be assembling the scaffold. So as you do that, there is the risk of falling from heights. You'll want guardrails, you want a fall arrest system, and of course, some fall protection training, as well as some scaffold assembly training, I would think. When you're climbing the scaffold, you want to make sure to avoid slips, trips, and falls. You've got non-slip boots. You're using anti-slip treads. Some form of ladder training is also probably appropriate. Hand tools on the platform. You're going to need tool safety training, but also, to avoid, again, those hard hats coming into use. We want tool lanyards. We want our hard hats. We want debris netting, and then struck by. So you see, we're kind of in on those focus 4 and those top 10 violations that OSHA is always logging on their annual list. Those are going to recur. And then when you're dismantling the scaffolding, again, you've got additional risk of falling objects and slips, trips, and falls. So there's a lot to be done. Whereas on the supervisor side, the range of hazards is going to be different, as are the controls that are implemented to deal with them. And you'll find that that's one of the critical splits between the types of training and controls that we need to be thinking about, is between the supervisor and the worker themselves. And as you run through 10 different examples, you'll start to see themes emerge that are like that. So these folks are looking at very different set of hazards. Am I communicating appropriately? There are a lot of things to notice. So am I recognizing all the hazards and identifying appropriate mitigation strategies? And then am I walking through, observing where there are safety violations and taking appropriate corrective action? And then, for injuries, we definitely need to be able to respond in an appropriate fashion. So the first thing you notice as you start to go through this is, yeah, there's a lot that could go wrong, but there's also a lot that I can do to keep people safe. I might have a handful of just a bit more control than I thought, because if I'm really thinking about all the potential controls, there are a lot of tools in my tool belt. And then as you start to do a lot more, you start to feel maybe something a little bit different. Which is, wow, there's a lot to worry about. So you look at an electrician and you're saying, wow, there's the risk of electric shock and arc flash and live wire contact. And is this circuit going to overload? Am I using a voltage tester? So that it does start to add up. The number and types of training needed to mitigate these, as well as the controls, are always going to be really significant, which is why there's no substitute for experience and best practices. If we walk through the first one, right, we've got lockout, tag out procedures, voltage and training, NFPA 70E, as well as ladder safety to when someone's installing wiring. If someone's testing circuits, critical PPE is going to be important, as well as understanding electrical safety hazards. I mentioned, right, the first thing you notice is a lot you can do. Then you notice in example 2, wow, there's a lot you have to do. But there is good news after you hit that point of there's a lot to worry about, which is you start to notice maybe some pretty significant overlap across the different kinds of controls and training that you may need to implement. So yeah, the hierarchy of controls shows us something really important, which is in all that complexity, we can't really create an excellent control for everything. We all know that it really comes down to people and how they behave, what they know, what they don't know, and their actions, because there is the maximum amount we can do, and then there's what people need to do for themselves to stay safe. I do think training kind of fits in that gap pretty neatly, where our controls leave off and people's behavior needs to keep themselves safe. But construction sites just are ever evolving, dynamic places where a lot of stuff can happen. But you do see, again, that foundation. We've got materials handling, ladder safety, fall protection, tool safety. Boy, that seems to recur a lot across all the JHAs I've seen for construction sites, as well as the ones I've done. So a way to kind of think about it is, you do have a foundational sort of training need upon which you can develop out these different sort of customized paths for people. So for example, you've got your focus for, people are going to always need to know about fall, struck by, caught in, electrocution. That's what's causing that, elevated fatality rate. And then supervisors are going to need to know, how do I intervene and prevent these incidents? They understand HazCom, first aid. And then after you hit that baseline training, that foundational set, then you kind of look to, what is this hazard analysis telling me about what else these people are going to experience once they're working and actually trying to execute this job. So the way that we kind of think about this is for what is that baseline training package look like, all the different topics that someone needs to take on. And then, are you a competent person? You're probably going to need some additional training around, how do I intervene in these situations? What does my stop work authority look like? For cranes and rigging, you're going to want some machine-specific training. If someone's working at heights, we covered pretty neatly in the full range of, hey, there's a lot that you're going to need to do to mitigate fall hazards. I think for a lot of folks, what that foundational piece looks like is that 10 and 30-hour training. That's not surprising. It's sort of by that, done that way by design. I'm going to go ahead and plug that, OSHA Education Center does offer 10 and 30-hour training that has just been revised. So we do offer that DOL card, that OSHA authorized training. All the courses are 100% up to date. They've actually been re-released in the past 6 months with some advanced features like that simulation you just saw, new animations, mobile friendliness, tons of interactivity. So it's something that we can always connect about afterward. When we talk about those foundational training elements that are critical for every work site, this is the list of the topics that you'll find in your typical OSHA 10-hour training. This is actually ours. The stuff in green, so modules 1 through 7, those are the non-optional OSHA topics. By statute, we have to hit introduction to OSHA. We got to cover the fatal focus 4, I'm sorry. Protective equipment, PPE, and then health hazards. But then you get those bottom 2 modules, 8 and 9, where we've done materials handling and tool safety, largely based on the fact that, these from our job hazard analyses over a long period of time are showing us that's what the construction folks need in order to be safe. But I think it's easy to argue that there are gaps in this training program that you might want to fill with some additional training. Especially, again, as you work through your own job hazard analysis, think about your job site and say, I need these 9 topics as well as some others. So the kind of way we have approached this is thinking through, all right, when you're being onboarded into a site or you're going through a refresher training on an annual basis, we work with OSHA authorized trainers and ask, what's missing from the onboarding experience in that 10 hour? So, ours would include the 10-hour, but as well, we want to cover a short drug and alcohol abuse. I don't think that the amount of fall protection training required by the 10-hour course that you'll find for all 10-hour courses is necessarily appropriate, especially because I think Ryan showed, the number of people dying from fall protection incidents, as well as if money is important, the number of fines assessed for fall prevention, failure to provide or duty to provide fall protection is astronomical. And then, housekeeping and accident prevention relates back to all of these other things. And then confined spaces are common enough that I do think that's a good fit for your onboarding. And then, the 10-hour DOL card, that's a one and done, right? You get that card, you are welcome to retake it on an annual basis, but there's a lot of folks who will say that's pretty heavy. Maybe we need to focus on more specific targeted approach around what our job site looks like. Again, we did work with OSHA authorized trainers to think through what a refresher package of courses would look like, where we're hitting some of the focus for an overall orientation, make sure we're focused on tools and evacuation. And this is something that we've done for both workers and supervisors. So for your onboarding for a worker, for their annual refresher, or a supervisor, or a worker becoming a supervisor, sort of an upgrade, like, hey, here's the stuff that's missing from your onboarding program, as well as, your new supervisor and your supervisor refresher stuff. And then once you've done that, that's your foundational component. Then you need to really think about these task specialized training ideas. So you're starting with your JHA, you're looking at what the controls are, and then you're asking yourself, where's the gap between what I can build into my work site and into my workflows and where people need to pick up the slack? And that's where you arrive at, all right, there are some things that we're probably going to need to train folks on beyond that foundation. If someone's working way more often with electrical equipment than the rest of their colleagues, probably time to dig in on NFPA 70E, probably time to think about what are the hazards that are specific to that person. If they're working on a lot more powered industrial trucks, or if they are taking on some additional supervisory responsibilities aligned with OSHA's requirement for competent persons around, say, excavation and trenching, or working at heights, or any number of things. And we're probably going to want to make sure that they're prepared to take on that additional responsibility with the right level of training. And that's actually a great example of one where competent person is not something you build controls for. Making someone who's a worker into a competent person something you train for. They need the right knowledge, the right experience, the right disposition to really understand when they need to intervene and how they intervene in appropriate situations. I'll also note, right, after a certain point, you're going to say, okay, but I have really niche responsibilities on this site. There are really hyper-specific things that we're focused on. So you do need sort of a deep bench. Here's another plug, which is our catalog is incredibly deep for construction. I think we're pushing 200 different topics at this point. So if there's an OSHA requirement, or if there's an issue that you're facing on your work site, we'd love to talk to you about how we already have something off the shelf that can meet that need. So I'll go ahead and kick it back over to Ryan, but that's sort of an overview looking at, we start with what are the range of controls and the jobs that we're doing. We got to analyze those on a step-by-step basis to think through what are the hazards and what are we doing to prevent them. And then out of that, you can find your way past that discomfort of, holy moly, there's a lot that I need to figure out, by understanding what the foundational elements of a training program really need to look like and how you build upon it in order to arrive at maximum safety for yourself and your team. Back to you, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing some of these best practices for building site-specific and role-specific training for construction folks. So we have reached our Q&A session, and feel free to pose any curiosities you may have with using that questions feature here on GoToWebinar. Our first question is, will I receive a copy of these webinar slides? Absolutely. So we will have these webinar slides available in a video recording of today's session about 24 hours after the session wraps. We're also planning on sending you our construction product report, which involves a lot of the information you saw in today's session. So be on the lookout for that content in the coming day or so. And Natasha is asking about the evacuation training. So wouldn't evacuation training be covered at each job site with a site-specific plan or an emergency action plan? And absolutely, yes. So without a shadow of a doubt, yeah, covering it generally. So I know we're doing kind of a high-level general overview now, but at the end of the day, folks need to do their own specific site-specific plans that are specific to, let's say, the environment, the nature of what they're doing, um, and that kind of thing. So it's covered more generally in this session, but and even in some of the training. But at the end of the day, folks need to develop their own site-specific plans. But uh, the good thing about training is that it can offer guidance on how to build those plans and some best practices for how to build those plans, if particularly people who are starting from scratch. Andy, I think I might be able to pose this one to you. Gabrielle is asking, can you share examples of how we deliver ongoing safety training? For example, online or self-paced or on the job with simple sign-in sheets. What is kind of the approach that we're taking here at OSHA Education Center?
Yeah, definitely. So the question, sorry, Ryan, it's about ongoing training and what the approach looks like, right?
Yeah, and examples of how we deliver our construction-specific training. Is
Yeah.
it online, self-paced, on the job with simple sign-in sheets? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So our delivery method is overwhelmingly online. We offer our training via the Fusion Learning Management System. It's a pretty simple system to use. You sign into your administration page. You've got a dashboard of all the training available to you, as well as the ability to add more. And then you assign it via the trainee's email. They will open the training, complete the training. You can see whether they've received it, whether they've started it, what their level of progress is through the course. And when they have completed and received their certificate, it also stores all of your certificates. As far as the more safety side of it, the way we're thinking is largely for ongoing training. This is supplemental. So you will need to conduct these trainings to meet OSHA standards as well as to maintain safety. But there's also toolbox talks are a critical part of the program. That sort of gets to that process section of the hierarchy of controls. And that's where I think that would fit in. Another way to think about this is, you want to create your own leading indicators of safety on the site. So rather than, wow, we had an incident, now let's react and figure out, hey, what should we have done, or how can we mitigate this one incident? Rather, the approach should be, what can we measure now to make sure that we have a baseline and then can make progress toward the goal of more, better safety. Toolbox talks are an awesome way to start that. Taking attendance, having people sign in, tracking what's our attendance rate and our rate that we're actually conducting these. And that could blossom into more frequent, more targeted toolbox talks, toolbox talks, and ultimately like a better program. Their folks are integrating a lot more elements beyond just that baseline, but what we're offering is that learning online approach in a variety of long and short topics, so that you can kind of hit what you need when you need to hit it.
Yeah, I would add to that. These construction folks, I know they often say, like many of the technicians we talk to in particular are saying, you know what, I need to learn directly from an expert. I need to learn in maybe a classroom environment, hands-on. That might be a lot of the kind of objections maybe you safety managers might be receiving, like, hey, I need to talk directly to someone and have an in-person training. The trouble with that in our job sites, we're just finding the reality is just people are so busy out there and in all these different sites that it's really hard to get, let's say, a quote unquote classroom together. Do we offer classroom OSHA 10 and 30 training? Absolutely. But we usually find that the reality of training is, hey, we can only take bits of this information at different times throughout our work week, let's say. And so the flexibility of being able to do a self-paced option, it really works pretty well for a lot of people. Yeah, and Brett just popped in with a great question. And I was just about to talk about this, so good timing. Brett says, how do you address those veteran construction workers who are new to technology to get them across the finish line? I mean, that is our challenge. And Andy and I are talking about this all the time with our simulations that we offer for training and some of our self-paced courses. How do we make them as easy as possible to use for that old guard, the people who are, and getting up there in age, I guess could say, or have been just doing that they're experts at what they do in the site. But when it comes to getting training and sitting down and having to find a login and a password and all that kind of stuff, it gets hard for those folks who are not as tech savvy. the really best way we can do it is utilize the technology to make it accessible and convenient for them, right? So to make their jobs easier. So instead of them, let's say, having to go find a file cabinet and find an old dirty book somewhere to have to read, and they can maybe bring it up on their phone or bring it up on their tablet, or even take it from the comfort of their own homes, um, and log in and get the information that they need. That's where kind of you all as safety managers can make it even more convenient by allowing them to what's the word, reset their password, or allowing them to just quickly have only one course they got to take at any given time, get it done, and then you can give them the next one, type of thing, from our learning management system. So yeah, access, convenience, super simple, and that's kind of one thing we try to design into our training programs that we deliver is one sign-on, one single sign-on location. For example, our Fusion learning management system, and all the training is done with just one login, and then you don't have to worry about managing logins, because yeah, these people are going to forget their password, and they're probably going to forget it often because they have better things to worry about than training in their eyes. So they want to be able to get it done quickly. I would say,
Yeah, if I
yeah,
can
go ahead.
piggyback on that, Ryan, just really quickly.
For sure.
That's an excellent point, and one we've heard for a decade or more, because we've been in this business a long time. And the new LMS that's just released, we have been hyper focused on solving that exact problem, with the maximum level of simplicity we can create for, in particular, for the student, which is log in, take course, sign out. That's how you do it. I do think, I don't want to oversell it, because the reality is, as you mentioned, there are folks who are not tech savvy who are going to struggle. And for those people, what we've got is excellent customer care, available via phone, via chat, via email, to help people out. And a UI, a user interface that doesn't evolve. It is what it is. So if you learned it once, you can do it again. I think that's really important. There's a tendency with a lot of apps to just re-release new updates, which is great. But if the button I click is always changing, that's not helpful if I'm 65 and don't want to be doing this. So we have also accounted for that. And then I also just want to mention, I don't think we've got a team of safety managers here. So I don't want to posture and pretend we're going to replace every bit of in-person learning, right? There is certainly a critical place for different methods to create, reinforcement of critical topics. I'll say some of the advantages of online training is that I think Ryan may have mentioned self-paced, so that people can digest the correct amount of information at the rate they need to, as well as the compliance piece of it, which is, sign-in sheets and file cabinets are one thing, but a dashboard showing who's where in their process is another. So you've got that as also an advantage to counterbalance against, there may be a learning curve to get folks on board, and that's just the reality of online learning.
Certainly. I really appreciate everyone's questions here. We got time for maybe one or two more. So Matthew is asking a good question about implementation, and that is, can we use, let's say, our online training, for example, materials in my specific construction company's online training portal? And the answer, Matthew, at least in our use case, is yes. There's kind of that whole world of LMS, or learning management system, integrations that companies utilize, and our learning management integrates really well with other ones, where you can essentially we send a file to, we send a SCORM 1.2 file to you all, and you load that to your system or your portal, and that file communicates with ours. So the idea being that you click on it on your company's system, that makes you take a temporary short-term trip over to our learning management system to take the course and to get all the, let's say, grades and test scores and all that kind of stuff. And then that communicates back to yours through that integration. And yep, that's what I would call them, dispatch SCORM files. We operate in SCORM 1.2. If you're in the world of e-learning, which it sounds like you are, Brett, if you know even what SCORM is. So thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So it is it is doable, and we have a lot of people who are like, you know what, Fusion's great, but we need our own learning management system. You can still utilize some of our training solutions in your own systems, and we set that up for you when you gain
Yeah,
access to our training solutions. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
just mentioning also, as far as the integration capabilities, we are able to provide SCORM files as well as CMI5, AICC, XAPI, a whole slew. So we can typically integrate with whatever LMS. That's not 100%, but it is overwhelmingly the case that if you've got an LMS, we'll work with you.
Yeah, well, we're excited about XAPI here at Certus and OSHA Education Center because we have people with different screen sizes, right? A cell phone versus a tablet versus your computer, that's a whole different experience of a training. But a lot of our new XAPI courses can adjust or be flexible to screen size. Adaptable to screen size, where it'll fit and morph and change. The text and the pictures and the images and the animations will all morph and change based on the size of screen and the shape of the screen that you're integrating. So we're staying on that cutting edge with some of our new OSHA 10 and OSHA 30 courses in particular, and some of the other great stuff that we're working on. Thank you so much for your curiosity, Brett and Matthew. And one more question I think we have here, and then we'll be done, is a best practice in terms of, this is from Carlo. Carlo's asking, are weekly safety meetings enough for a job site, or should it be daily? And that's a really good question, Carlo, that unfortunately I can't answer for you 100% because you know your job site better than we may do right now. But regular, right? Regular, recurring, and consistent safety meetings. So I think I would say have them as often as you feel like are needed based on how quickly things are changing in your environment. They do say OSHA is pretty clear when it comes to particularly electrical safety, which is something I've specialized in, is doing job briefings. Our job briefings are required, but before doing any live electrical work, so that's every single time doing a certain job that there's hazards, we have to brief out the job, look at the written procedure for that job, make sure we're all being safe doing that job. So that's kind of an every job type of situation. Yeah, and Brett, thank you for sharing what your company is doing here. His company is doing daily safety meetings, for example, and that includes, like we talked about, looking at those job safety analysis and similar to what Andy just presented, our job hazard analysis, kind of breaking down the tasks, and the toolbox talks, which is I think our term of a job briefing, where we're kind of going over the stuff on a regular basis. Toolbox talks we love because they're part of that safety culture, like just ingraining those conversations into our safety culture, like we talked about, that third most important aspect of any of these programs. So
Yeah.
I hope that helps, Brett. I know there's no one, there's not like a requirement, for example, you must have a safety meeting every X, Y, Z, but they must be happening at a regular basis.
Ryan, I think there's the way to think about it. I do hear a lot more folks doing daily briefings than less than more sporadic, but you can kind of think through at your particular site, which Ryan, you pointed out smartly, it kind of depends. The answer is depends.
Right.
But you want to think about things like, what is the level of risk or hazard? Obviously, if the hazard is higher, you need more safety briefings to ensure folks are ready to go. What is the current level of expertise of the people on your site at dealing with those hazards? If people aren't prepared, then you're going to want to be on top of them more. And then how dynamic is that work site? Do the hazards change on an ongoing basis at such a rate that you really need to make sure you're continuing to keep people looped? So it's sort of that. It's level of hazard, level of expertise, and then how static or dynamic is the site. I would say are the main ways to gauge, hey, we need more or less touch on safety.
Indeed. Last comment here and question from Gabriella, and then we're going to call it a day. We want to honor your hour with us together. Thank you so much for being here. And Gabriella mentions, do we have a library of our computer-based trainings that we can share? And yes, we absolutely do. There's a catalog, particularly of the construction packages that we have available. So we'll make sure that is shared with you and everyone on this call in our upcoming email correspondence with you. So thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, Andy, for sharing your expertise with us. It's been a pleasure talking with all of you construction industry experts here about best practices and training. Thank you so much, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon. Have a great one.